From Sleepy Joe to Smoking Joe Biden, the race to face off against Donald Trump in the 2020 presidential race looks a whole lot different this week after Joe Biden crushes it with voters on Super Tuesday. But now Super Tuesday is over, and the next big prize for delegates is Michigan. Joining us now to talk about it is political expert Joe DeSano. Joe, thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So today's big news, every day there's big news. Today's big news is Elizabeth Warren is out.
Elizabeth Warren's out, and Governor Whitmer endorsed Joe Biden today.
Right. Also big news. Either of those surprising to you?
No.
Why do you think Governor Whitmer went with Biden, and why do you think, did you always expect maybe today would be the day she endorsed somebody?
There was a lot of speculation that she was under intense pressure to endorse. I don't think that was the case at all. I think basically it's a signal to folks that this thing's over. Democratic primary voters spontaneously ended this election, this primary election on Super Tuesday, and everything after this is a formality. There is a great desire to wrap this up and move on to defeating Donald Trump.
So what happened from 10 days ago when Joe Biden was apparently out of this thing and it was time for him to pack up and call it quits to today where, he's getting ready to, he's actually edging out Sanders in the polls now in Michigan?
Yeah, I never thought he should pack it up and go away. I mean, I thought that Iowa and New Hampshire were atypical states, and that once you got to broader constituencies, specifically African Americans, Joe Biden would have much more appeal. So, the people who were bedwetting and fretting at Joe's chances, I think, were wrong, and they're going to continue to be wrong because this thing is done now. He's going to have almost insurmountable lead in delegates headed into the election after this Tuesday, because as you said, the polls here in Michigan are closing, and that's maybe the thing that I think is most disappointing for Sanders supporters. This thing was within their grasp. It was almost knockout time, and then voters put an end to it. Basically, African-American voters saved the Democratic Party on Super Tuesday. I will say it again and again and again. That's what happened.
In South Carolina or on Super Tuesday?
South Carolina. In South Carolina, then across the country, people came home because the idea of a Bernie Sanders nomination was too much for people to imagine, and it would have been a disaster down ballot for Democrats.
But let's talk about the dominoes that fell into place for Joe Biden. I mean, first you had Pete Buttigieg drop out, and then 12 hours later, Amy Klobuchar drops out. How is it that they suddenly decide to drop out and support Joe Biden instead of, say, Bernie Sanders, or decide to stay in it?
Well, I think it comes down to a couple things: mathematics and ambition. Both Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar want to be national voices going forward. I think almost certainly are by virtue of this campaign. But if they would have thrown in with a Bernie Sanders who is a destructive force, they would have seen a lot of their ambitions vaporize. And also, they were running on fumes money-wise. Much like Joe Biden, they did not have vibrant staffs in the upcoming states. So I think they didn't have the organization. The money was shut off, and they want to preserve their voices for the future. So, as always, politicians will go with the self-preservation route.
And so now we're looking at a two-person race, Sanders and Biden. How do you think this plays out first in Michigan, which everybody's looking at right now, and then as it moves on across the states, especially Florida and Ohio and some of these key states?
Well, I think Michigan has the chance to deliver the knockout blow to Bernie Sanders that people have been predicting for a while now. And then, you're looking at situations where there's one poll that came out today in Florida that shows Bernie Sanders not even reaching the 15% threshold to qualify for any of the delegates. So, this is also a week after he spent it praising the Castro regime and basically taking the talking points from the Little Red Book about how great communism is, and that's a tough thing for people in Florida, particularly, to deal with. So we're looking at that. If that comes to pass a week after Michigan, I mean, everyone in the world will see with zero doubt that this thing's over.
Yeah, it seems every week the story has changed as candidates ride the roller coaster. What would happen if somehow Bernie Sanders came out and won in Michigan? Would it change the story yet again?
No, because we're starting to reach into there's no series of contests in one day like a Super Tuesday where there's so many delegates on the ballot at one time that he'll be able to catch up. Especially the screwy way Democrats allocate their delegates by proportion, that makes it even harder to cut that numerical edge down. So, also you have a situation where many of Buttigieg and Klobuchar's delegates will end up voting for Biden as well. No one's including them in the final tally. So this number and this gap get bigger and bigger before folks even realize it.
So what do you see as the impact of Elizabeth Warren getting out? Because most of her supporters would likely be closer to Bernie Sanders' ideas than Joe Biden's ideas.
Well, I would maybe challenge that a little bit. I can only speak anecdotally, and I've seen some polling that would indicate they split pretty evenly between the two candidates. But this is where you can't discount the Bernie bro phenomenon. You had weeks of the Bernie Sanders online terrorists going after Elizabeth Warren with snake emojis, and now you're asking her and trying to persuade her to come to your campaign. It's interesting interpersonal politics, to say the least.
But you're going to have a similar problem coming up with if Bernie doesn't get there and Biden does. Biden absolutely needs all of Bernie's supporters to beat Trump.
Yeah, and he'll get 80 to 90% of them. There's always a contingent of the Bernie Sanders fan group that was never going to vote for anyone but Bernie, or frankly, maybe wouldn't even vote at all. I mean, one of the things that happened here in Super Tuesday was the youth vote didn't show up anyways. So if your whole campaign is based on the premise, as Sanders' campaign is, that you're going to expand the electorate and boost turnout, but then your core constituency, young people, doesn't show up in a disproportional number, then the very point of your candidacy ceases to exist.
So does Governor Granholm get any extra clout for backing Biden if he ends up winning?
Yeah, I think so. I think you may very well see her on the ticket in the fall as well.
Really?
She checks a lot of boxes for him as vice president.
He wouldn't need somebody who was already running, one of the other candidates.
Oh, he's going to look at a wide group of people, but you have a fresh, young voice from a state that is a must-win, who's been lambasted for being too moderate, when in fact she's actually a pretty stalwart liberal. She checks a lot of boxes, and there's going to be a lot of people auditioning for this. But she has the benefit of not auditioning. She just has, by virtue of resume and position, the perfect profile for him.
All right, Joe, thanks for joining us. Look forward to talking to you next time. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, my friend.
We'll be right back with more news now after this. Taylor Vitandi keeps an eye on the internet for us to watch all the stories that you're talking about. She joins us now to bring us up to date on some of these. What's hot this week?
There has been a lot happening this week between just political, everything else happening. There's the coronavirus that we talked about last time. There's a lot that's going on. But we're going to get a little bit local today. So this is for Detroiters all around Detroit. Gretchen Whitmer did pass a law now that it's basically called the pay as you stay
I saw
Detroit.
this, yeah.
So it's really going to help families kind of be able to stay away from foreclosure. They said that like 31,000 Detroiters so far will be able to avoid that and, have a little help financially with monthly payments and everything like that. So it's really going to be good for the local.
We were talking with a different guest about the foreclosure problem in Detroit, and they were telling me that in the height of it, 1 out of every 4 people in Detroit lost their home to foreclosure. I mean, that is amazing. Yeah. And for anyone who's been through it, it is so traumatic.
Right.
They literally, the sheriff calls and says, hey, you have to be out by Sunday, get your stuff out.
It happens so fast, and it's really unfair. These people work so hard. They're doing everything they can to try to keep their home together, and it just a lot of times turns out where it's financially impossible, So I really do I think this is a good idea, especially for our local Detroit. I know a lot of families who are trying really hard, and it will help them a lot.
Well, when people were losing their homes, one of the side problems that came along with that was blight, because so many people were out of their homes, but there weren't new people to move into them.
Correct.
So they sat abandoned. So nobody was fixing them up, and
Right.
the windows would get broken, and
Right.
then you'd see more and more boarded up homes, which is a real problem for blight and crime and a lot of
Absolutely.
other problems in Detroit.
Yeah, and it's so sad too, because there's some beautiful homes too that, yeah, you're right, people will break into, people will squat in, homeless people will just be there, and it's kind of like you start thinking to yourself, for what, like, so I think this will help prevent things like that.
So this is going to kind of freeze the interest, right? Make sure that the bills don't get any higher, possibly reduce some of the delinquent taxes.
Correct, yeah, so it's going to help with like lowering monthly payments for people, as far as mortgages, things like that. It's just going to make it more doable. A lot of people, I mean, like I said, these people are working hard. They're trying to make it work, but it's just they can't catch up. So I think this will really help them kind of get more stable in their own home.
What about the people who pay on time and pay their mortgage and don't
Right.
get a cut on their taxes? Is
Right.
it just part of the process? You have to help those who need the help, and
Right,
those who
yeah.
can pay just
With
may end
any-
up paying a little more.
We were talking about this earlier. With anything, there are people who will take advantage of certain, opportunity. But I always just try to remember the people who really need it. And I would hate to deny them just because of being scared of, others taking advantage. So, I mean, like I said, I feel like that's with anything. There will always be people who will try to take advantage of the situation. But I feel like the people who need it, it's going to be really
Yeah,
good
and
for them.
ultimately the tax will get paid. It just will get paid over, I think, 3 years, and there won't be extra interest tacked on to make it
Mm-hmm. Right.
insurmountable.
Correct.
And keeping people in their homes is just crucial. It
Yeah,
really is.
especially families and stuff. Oh, yeah, it's definitely.
You were saying the other story you wanted to talk about is St. Anne's Church.
Yes, so in Detroit, St. Anne's Parish has now been honored by the Pope for being a basilica, which is a huge honor by the Pope. I think that only, as far as I've researched, only 86 churches in the U.S. have been honored with this. So it's a huge deal for Detroit. It's great. There's tons of people that go to that church too. So it's very exciting that, he chose that church to.
Yeah, in Michigan, there's only 3. I know the Shrine of the Little Flower is one in Royal Oak, and then the other one's in Grand Rapids. I can't remember the name of that church. So this will be the 3rd one. I spent a lot of time at this church. This church was very close to the old TV station that I worked at, and we would go down there all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just so beautiful down there. It's such a
Yes.
great place if you haven't been. And people don't realize that this church is the 2nd oldest church in the whole country.
Yes, and it was actually built in 1701. So yeah, it is the 2nd oldest. And I just, to have landmarks that are that rich in history, I can see why he would pick that church.
So our family was in Rome this year, and we went to the St. Mark's Basilica and St. Peter's Basilica, one in Venice, one at the Vatican. And I mean, it was unbelievable. We were just, so impressed by being there. You just felt special for being there.
Absolutely.
And the idea of having a basilica here in Detroit and be able to go in there is just awesome. And to think how many people will actually head out there to see it because it's now a basilica,
Right.
and get to share what people who live down there in the Southwest have known for so
Yeah.
long.
Yeah, it's kind of just it's good publicity too, on top of everything else that's awesome for it. So yeah, I think the numbers will start to climb even more than they already are for that church. So I think that's great,
So it's actually called a minor basilica. In St. Mark's, St. Peter's are called major basilicas. Do you know the difference?
Well, I'm assuming, as far as Vatican goes, I know we are not the Vatican. So I'm not Catholic myself, but I try to keep up with all those things and be, knowledgeable about it. But I'm sure that you'll probably know more than me about it.
It's pretty simple. It's just that to be a major basilica, you have to be in Rome, where the church was started. So
See, I was almost right.
You were
yeah.
very close. So any basilica outside of Rome is considered a minor
Oh,
basilica.
okay. You learn something new every day.
Yes. So what's happening this weekend?
Well, we do have something a little local here in Frasier's Spring Craft Show. So this is really fun. They have it every year. They do it at Frasier High School. And it is happening this Saturday, March 7th from 10 to 4. Admission's only $2, and there's going to be live music, there will be food, tons of craft vendors for people to go through, and it's great for being able to get people with their own business, with their own crafts, to be able to push it out there. It's great for business, for local people, and I think it's going to be really fun. I always love going to those craft shows.
So people who might make jewelry at home or art too? Or?
Art, oh yeah, everything. I mean, anything that I've seen everything between phone cases that they've made, to necklaces, to watches, to paintings. It's a good time for everyone to get creative, and then people will see it and be like, wow, that's so different. You're never going to see it in a store. So whatever you're buying, it's unique. So,
how are the prices at places like that?
I guess it probably depends on where, which craft show you're going to, and it probably depends on the quality of the things too. But usually people will be pretty spot on as far as price. They know not to overprice their, if it's not quite there. So, but it's very affordable. Like I said, admission's only $2. So yeah, it's really good for the community and for everything else. So.
All right, thanks for checking in this week. We'll be back with more news now after this. The state of Michigan may become the next headquarters of several aerospace projects as moves are being made to have a launch site in northern Michigan. It's just one move in an aerospace movement that could bring many new jobs to Michigan. Here to talk about it is Gavin Brown of the Michigan Aerospace Manufacturing Association. So this is very exciting. I mean, we've known each other for over 10 years, and we've been talking about a lot of these ideas for a long time, and so many are now coming to fruition. Where is Michigan in the aerospace future?
Michigan is going to be emerging as far as its growth and its impact in space, but we've had a long-standing tradition, starting with Willow Run when we were producing bombers for World War II. We let that go away, but there's a great deal of manufacturing, both for fixed wing, rotor wing, and composite work, as well as tooling. So our state is known quite a bit in the aerospace industry for its great tooling, but also for its component manufacturing. Now we're taking that ecosystem and saying, how can that apply to the future needs of the U.S.? And so above and beyond just the air, now we're going into space. And we're going to take that knowledge that we have both through the academia and the industry, and then show how that can be applied to the future demands for, let's say, LEO, which is low Earth orbit.
So we've really come a long way. A lot of people have just been talking about drones. You see how cool drones are, and they are cool, right? And you guys have done a lot of things with drones. But this is even going to another step.
It is. And in fact, we are doing very well in the drones. We call them UAVs too. The work in the state, along with the academia, is providing great application uses for drones. I will tell you though, you take that technology and now you go into space and benefit the industry as itself. Part of what you do is divided up in space. So we're not going to be doing deep space to Mars or the moon. That's not our focus. LEO is the satellites for communication systems. That's really where the growth is going to be here in the near future.
So explain why that growth is so exponential, why it's getting so big.
It's the use of new technology. So the old satellites were usually very big and cumbersome as far as movement, and once the technology starts changing, you're stuck with that technology in space. LEO gives you the ability, if technology changes, to rapidly put that technology up and utilize it. For instance, with the emerging 5G networks coming on board, they're going to need that application in LEO. And as that technology may evolve, the expense that used to be there by launching these satellites and keeping them for years, and then not being able to upgrade them with new technology, that whole dimension changes with LEO, where you are able then to say, new technology being applied, let's get it up, and we can do that in a relatively short period of time.
When I think of satellites, I think of TV shows, my mobile phone, my car, maybe navigation systems. Are these the ways satellites impact us? In what other ways do they impact us?
Well, the big impact in our state will be with autonomous technology for vehicles. So how that gets applied for where cars don't just operate autonomously but talk to one another in rural areas going down the road, so they have what I would call contiguous and continuous use and application as far as communicating. That's going to change the way we drive. But here in Michigan, our DNA has been with the growth of automotive. So this actually will allow us to then take what we've done in the past, and I like to say bring us back to the future, which is now be leaders in autonomous technology and how it's applied.
So we'd still be known as an automotive state, but we would also be an automotive aerospace technology state.
Correct. So when we talk about mobility, mobility happens when you have that technology that's actually communicating uninterrupted. So what you're going to find with this technology through space, that answer. So when you look at Tesla and other cars, the true autonomous vehicle will have to demonstrate its ability to not lose a signal and to be able to talk to other cars going down the road, whether it's in Detroit or whether it's in Traverse City or going over the bridge. That's going to be only achieved by a combination of air, land, and space 5G technology.
So tell us about what's happening up north. You guys did have a bit of news about a certain project.
We did a ranking as far as the sites for horizontal. So what we did is we hired firms, we hired industry experts to evaluate over 52 different subject matters to give a scoring for horizontal. And Wordsmith in Oscoda was the top ranked facility. And now we move forward from that to the pre-licensing and licensing process with the FAA. The FAA will be heavily involved in our going forward from this point forward.
So what might we see one day in the near future up north at some of these sites?
For horizontal, you'll see a large plane carrying a other smaller vehicle underneath it so that it carries it to a certain altitude and then releases it into space. That's the horizontal. The vertical, which we will be announcing in 45 days, will actually be similar to what you see at the Cape as far as launch, but we will not have those rockets the size that the Cape launches because they do the deep space missions.
Mm-hmm. And so would people actually be able to go, though, and watch this kind of launch?
Not only will they be able to attend and see what's happening, but I think it enters us into that space state tourism industry.
People should probably start paying attention because it's going to get pretty exciting in Michigan, isn't it?
I think it's not only going to get exciting, but this is where technology is going. And by being a leader, as opposed to following along and seeing what happens, will separate us from everyone else.
All right. Thank you very much. Come back and update us soon, okay?
Thank you, Kevin.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. For everyone at News Now, I'm Kevin Dietz. Good night.